Hello.
Our story begins with a clash inside the halls of the Theed Palace. Master and apprentice defended the Queen of Naboo as she and her guard rushed for the windows. Maul, knowing about two different groups of Jedi being on Naboo, decided to confront each duo from a different location, providing him with a better chance of surviving and winning again. The Sith apprentice already had a short engagement with Qui-Gon on Tatooine. He knew that his best chances were in 2-on-2 duels. He hoped that he'd be able to separate the Padawans from their teachers, but the Jedi weren't even that foolish. One duo, the one with the Queen, were before him. Where the other duo was, he didn't know. They split off inside the hangar bay and were currently far away from the lightsaber duel in these halls. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were not face to face with Maul. They instead were inside the throne room after easily capturing Nute Gunray and holding him hostage despite the threat of destroyer droids. It was a tense standoff because the droids were programmed to dispose of the threat before them, and Gunray, who was also before them, didn't want to die. But he certainly didn't want to surrender to two Jedi, especially when his entire army was fighting in the fields of Naboo and in the streets of Theed. Yet Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon used their positions close to the door and their lightsabers to get themselves and Gunray out of the throne room and lock the door on the droidekas. As they got out, Obi-Wan told Qui-Gon that something felt wrong. He feared for their friends. The Jedi Master looked at his apprentice for a moment, feeling through the Force as they continued to back away from the royal chambers. They had a clear path towards the hangar bay from here. The two of them had already cut through the B1s that filled the halls leading to the throne room from this direction. So Obi-Wan could get Gunray back to a Naboo starship and ensure that he didn't sneak away anywhere. Qui-Gon, in a quick judgment, decided that he would look for the other two Jedi. He immediately worried that they could be in jeopardy of the assassin he confronted on Tatooine. Obi-Wan could be trusted with the single man responsible for this invasion though. In another corridor, far from there, Queen Sabe fell behind a wall as Captain Panaka fired at Maul. His arm was cut off and he was flung across the hall. Padme Amidala, 14-year-old native of Naboo, blasted her saber at the Sith assassin. He deflected the strike as her master rushed in from behind. The Jar Kai using Mandalorian Jedi Master swept her sabers down on Maul's weapon. Satine, the same age as her best friend Obi-Wan, spun backwards, batting the Sith saber staff away from landing a lethal blow. Maul grew aggravated, especially with the Naboo guard rushing around their engagement towards the throne room. Padme rejoined the fight, throwing her blue saber in a jab towards Maul's back, but he deflected in time. He was fluid in his movements, trained to perfection by Sidious, the monstrous Zabrak warrior trying to cut off the Naboo guard avoiding them, but there weren't any avenues, with the two Jedi blocking him. Satine tried to signal to Padme that she needed to leave this duel, because Maul could kill her, but Padawan Amidala was too focused on saving her native people. It created a slight rift in the duel for the Jedi, giving Maul yet another advantage. He bashed his weapon forward, throwing Padme off her feet and forcing Satine to aggressively attack from behind. Maul's saber pulled around his back, deflecting the first attacking weapon. He twisted towards Satine, and she jabbed her second saber forward, completely whiffing. The Sith assassin grinned, seizing the moment when Satine's saber pulled back against the near side of Maul's weapon. She was both pushing and pulling, leaving Maul in a stuck predicament, where he couldn't do anything to escape this without potentially injuring himself. Their sabers dragged and shrieked in the same position, continuing to leave an unsatisfying echo in the corridor of the palace. Maul, instead of taking this mistake in pride, cheated his way out of it like a true Sith. He extinguished his saber and slid to the side, allowing Satine to miss him with both her strike down and her pull back. The saber staff ignited on one end, and Maul thrust it down, cutting through the hilt of Satine's dominant weapon. She rolled the other saber back into Form 3. She hadn't fully learned the form yet, but was familiar and comfortable enough with it to protect herself. Padme watched as the Zabrak swung forward aggressively. Master and assassin traded blows until the second end of Maul's saber ignited, and Satine, without any other defense, prepared to meet the Force. Just as the back end of the saber reached her side, it stopped. Qui-Gon, from the top of the stairs behind her, held the weapon with the Force. Maul shoved forward harder, but the Elder Jedi Master was unbothered. Jyn continued to hold the saber away from Satine as she spun away, readying her saber in what would be Jar Kai if she had a second weapon. Qui-Gon released Maul and leapt down through the air. The Zabrak prepared to counter when Padme's lightsaber activated again, forcing the Sith assassin to stutter step. He was going to attack Qui-Gon, who seemed the most vulnerable, but he stopped himself. Padme ran a perfect distraction, just a little enough for Qui-Gon to bash down through Maul's hilt, separating both ends of the saber. He was shocked, and also terrified. Not to say that he was especially drained of energy, but Qui-Gon was seemingly fresh without having endured a lightsaber duel. The Jedi Master took point, with the younger Master following right behind him. Their emerald weapons landed hits and cut down across Maul's singular blade. Satine followed Qui-Gon's movements, covering where he couldn't, and forcing the Sith to use every last ounce of his Master's training to survive. 2 Jedi was more than enough, but 3, that was too much. Padme, seeing the distracted Maul without his saber staff, sneakily sliced her saber across the back of his knees. It didn't remove them, but he dropped to the ground in shock. It allowed Jyn the chance to disarm their opponent, and for Satine to lock him up in restraints. Far from them, inside the hangar bay itself, Obi-Wan kicked Gunray's legs out from under him, demanding that he contact the battleship in orbit and shut down the droids. He refused, and Kenobi, the still eager and aggressive Padawan he was, ignited his lightsaber. He did some research while they were on Coruscant. Newt was a coward. He would buckle if threatened, and despite Obi-Wan not acting like a Jedi, his suspicions were right. The Viceroy of the Federation opened up his communicator and ordered the control ship to begin the official surrender. It was cowardly, but what Obi-Wan read was true. It's exactly who Gunray was. This did lead to a funny scenario, where the droid control ship ended the land battle of Naboo by shutting down all the droids, but it also left room for Anakin to accidentally destroy the Lucrehulk. It gave the young pilot a sense of triumph, the Gungans more survivors, and the Jedi a true victory, not only over the Federation but the Sith too. With Newt Gunray and Darth Maul captured, the Jedi would return to Coruscant as heroes of the Order. Qui-Gon made the executive decision to return to the temple with Satine, while the 2 Padawans enjoyed their adulation in the celebration of victory. Obi-Wan and Padme wouldn't be needed from here on out anyways, and instead of the full council going to Naboo, Masters Windu, Plo, and Yaddle would remain behind to interrogate the captured assassin from Tatooine. Anakin was overjoyed because his friend Padme would stay with him on Naboo. Though this triumph was great, it did leave more questions than it did answers. Not just about the Sith, but the master and apprentice duo of Satine Kryze of Mandalore and Padme Amidala of Naboo. 25-year-old Jedi Master Kryze thought about this on her journey back to Coruscant with her close friend Qui-Gon Jinn. She was born and pretty much raised as a Jedi. Her father, fearing a coming war, sent his eldest daughter to the temple so that she could be raised and protected. Mandalorians didn't really trust the Jedi, but he wanted to believe that their history of conflict could be saved by Satine's placement inside the Order. He hoped that their relationship would grow once she reached adulthood, but he died long before that could come. Kryze didn't know much about her family, other than the fact that she was a noble, her home world was still devastated by civil war, and that she had a younger sister. She didn't know much beyond that, and truthfully it was out of her control. Mandalore's open hostility towards the Jedi Order seemed misplaced from her perspective. Satine was a Jedi. That's what mattered most to her. That and her friends, the most important of which being Obi-Wan. She and Kenobi grew up together inside the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan had a higher potential ceiling based on his M count, but some Jedi are late bloomers, which is what Kenobi was. It didn't help that he had a semi-tense relationship with Master Jyn. Everyone loved Qui-Gon, his opinions on the Order just differed from Obi-Wan's. Though it should be said that Satine excelled to the rank of Jedi Knight because of a close relationship to her master, and her specific focus on the Force. She and Obi-Wan were the same age, she younger by only a few months, but she was already a Jedi instructor. It's mostly because Yaddle and Satine got along famously. They were an inseparable master and apprentice duo. Kryze found her balance in serenity with the Force. She was almost as dedicated to meditation and the Force as the Guardians of the Wills on Jedha. Satine became a knight at the age of 21, which isn't significantly early. It was impressive, but it was well before Obi-Wan was considered ready by his master. Yaddle believed her student, Satine, was prepared for knighthood due to her patience. Yaddle was also an incredible teacher with well over 300 years of instructing experience compared to Qui-Gon. But Satine did the hard work that she needed to. Her focus on Jar Kai as a Padawan matched with her ability to negotiate and find resolution through peace made her the perfect material for a Jedi Knight. As has been mentioned, she and Obi-Wan were very close, and they also were very similar Jedi. Kenobi was still a bit of a hothead though. Had he fought with Maul on Naboo, he would have displayed little traits of the dark side. Not because he was interested by darkness, he just hadn't mastered his emotions yet. Satine, inside the vessel, looked to Qui-Gon. She remembered the first time she met him. It was after Obi-Wan had been selected to become his apprentice. Her friend was so excited and eager. She was thrilled to be Yaddle's student at the time, and she waited almost impatiently for her best friend to have a chance at becoming a Jedi Padawan. No one really thought Qui-Gon would pick a student, but he chose Obi-Wan. It was one of the best days of both of their lives because, despite what some said about Dooku and his apprentice, Qui-Gon was beyond kind. He wasn't some radical member of the Order, just someone who was clearly misunderstood. It actually brought Master Kryze back to the High Council chambers after Tatooine. She remembered it. Even though she was more trusted by the Great Elders, they still thought that the duel with Maul was an imaginative game created by Qui-Gon. No one believed the Sith had returned. It was preposterous, as clearly stated by Ki-Adi-Mundi. The discussion left a sour taste in Satine's mouth because she had always heard how the Council perceived Qui-Gon and Dooku, but never really had a reason to believe that they perceived him as such, until she experienced it herself. She apologized to Qui-Gon inside the vessel en route to Coruscant. The older Jedi didn't understand why, and she explained what she had been thinking about, specifically the previous interaction they had with the High Council following his engagement on Tatooine. Qui-Gon was very forgiving though. He didn't blame them for thinking less of the situation. It wasn't exactly beyond the Council to see the Sith as an unbelievable circumstance. They had been convinced for so long that it was impossible. Just seeing it made Qui-Gon doubt himself, though he commended her and her student for the work they did. Protecting Queen Sabe was no easy task, and she did it with a calm heart. He gestured to the unconscious Maul and quietly remarked that their opponent was not an easy foe to handle. Satine should be proud of herself and her student. The young master countered they should all be proud. They saved a planet together, and maybe even stopped the Federation. Qui-Gon leaned back and rubbed his chin. He hoped that that was true. On Naboo, following these celebrations, Palpatine joined Queen Sabe in the throne room, where she would explain what she wanted. Padme and Sabe were very similar, and would have been similar queens had Padme not become a member of the Jedi Order. The only real difference between them was that Sabe did not accompany the Jedi to Mos Espa on Tatooine. Master Jin, Padawan Amidala, Jar Jar, and R2 went into the city. Sometimes Master Kryze would join them, but mostly it was that squad, which led directly to the Jedi Padawan bonding with the slave boy from the planet. She was the first one to pick up on the sensitivity to the Force that Anakin had, and when she went to inform Qui-Gon privately, he had by that point already figured it out. Most of their journey was actually quite similar, aside from the few times that Satine tried to broker a deal between the Queen and Watto. The Toydarians simply refused to negotiate though, so in the end, Anakin had to win the pod race, and Shmi was left behind. It disheartened Padme greatly. She actually became slightly upset with Qui-Gon because of it. Not that he had to be capable of freeing every single slave in the Outer Rim, or on Tatooine, or in Mos Espa, but because he was still abiding by the classic Jedi recruitment tactics. He pulled a 9-year-old boy away from his mother. She worried for what kind of damage that might do to Anakin, and she insisted on asking Qui-Gon about his plans regarding Shmi and the other slaves. Though as she would really come to learn and disagree with, that was the burden of being a Jedi. Qui-Gon didn't want to leave Shmi behind, but Anakin needed to be trained. He wished he could free all of the slaves, but that was too large of a task, even for all 10,000 Jedi in the galaxy. They could theoretically solve the problem on Tatooine, but that might cause a myriad of other problems, ones that might be worse than the current situation. It was an important lesson for the young Padawan from Naboo, but not one that she would forget. Qui-Gon explained the situation with this example. If the Jedi went on a commando raid of the Hutts and wiped all of them out, they would have a net positive without the Hutts. But the cartel was also the central leadership and/or government in that territory. If the Jedi uprooted them, then sure, they'd be gone, but the Republic would not go in and colonize that territory. There'd be no protection, and in the power vacuum, someone else could rise. It could be someone benevolent, sure, or someone harsher. They just couldn't know. An individual could have been wronged by the Hutts, and in response to their destruction, might try to exact harsher punishment against the people who once lived under the cartel. There were simply too many variables, and not enough support from the government to accomplish these things. It felt terrible, it truly did. But these were the terms of which the Jedi must understand. It's why Qui-Gon willingly cut the High Council slack, compared to his master that is. Jin realized that some things were too large even for the Jedi. It's also why he insisted that they stop listening to the Galactic Senate. But the Council's choices were far from his control. Padme, currently on Naboo, reflected on these conversations. Coming from the lineage of Yaddle to Kryze, she could be the one to make a change. Satine was much like Obi-Wan, true believers in the Jedi path, as was Yaddle. But maybe, someday, they could make a difference. Stop listening to the Senate and save people from slavery altogether. It was blissful optimism, absolutely, but Amidala had a heart filled with a desire for change. The more time she spent around her new friend Anakin, the more she wished she could snap her fingers and make a difference in the galaxy. It just wasn't that easy. It was the pain of growing up, but also the burden of being a Jedi in a galaxy with so much turmoil. Obi-Wan watched his young friend cycle through these thoughts. She didn't verbally say anything, but her face showed discontentment. When he learned what plagued her mind, he inspired her, and with her, inspired Anakin. A Jedi might not be able to change everything, but a Jedi could be the inspiration to make people change. She always looked up to Obi-Wan like a big brother because he was her master's closest friend. This was yet another sentiment from Kenobi that Padme needed to have faith in the Jedi, and especially in her path as one of them. Things might not make sense now, but in the future, as she grows into a Jedi Knight, a Master, or even a Sentinel if she desires, it'll all come together. Her mission now is to best understand her Master's perspective, and if she wants to form a different opinion from that. Padawan Amidala appreciated this from her friend, but it also left an important impact on Anakin too. His future had yet to be decided, and with Qui-Gon away from Naboo, it was almost easier for Yoda to simply reject Anakin. He could stay here with Sabe at the palace and become one of the handmaidens, but you know, the male version. He'd have a much better life than he would on Tatooine. Yet, Yoda considered how unfair that would be to Qui-Gon, who vouched so hard for Skywalker, promising to take on the training. And, not for nothing, Master Jin was one of 3 Jedi who captured a potential Sith assassin. With Kenobi definitely becoming a knight per Qui-Gon's request on Coruscant, the Grand Master had an important decision to make. While bringing Anakin into the Jedi Order wasn't a unanimous decision, he was permitted. This was specifically in thanks to Master Yaddle not dying, because of the butterfly from Qui-Gon surviving his duel with Maul. 3 Jedi were simply too much for Maul, and the biggest reason he lost was because he got in his head about it. Had he not been deceived, he may have come out on top too. But the Jedi, after seeing the truth about the return of the Sith, decided that they should put more trust into Qui-Gon. He was not Dooku. His former master was off the deep end. At least Master Jin still respected the will of the Council, despite having his grievances and disagreements with their choices. Another reason they allowed Anakin into the Order was Padme. She was a pseudo-replacement for Shmi. Not that they wanted Anakin to form another attachment, or even that they wanted Padme to form an attachment to young Skywalker, but she was there for him. He was always calm around her, and despite the elders not knowing that, it was her presence that made Anakin seem more trustworthy, they still accepted him. Qui-Gon promised his apprentice the release of Shmi Skywalker, but there was already a blockage in the road for the Jedi Master. Dooku did not become a Sith. He got cold feet. He learned that Hego Damas II had gone missing and immediately assumed the worst. It meant that Sidious was the only Sith alive, not captured that is, and if Qui-Gon was so insistent about training Anakin as a Jedi, it meant that he would definitely not join the Sith. There was no reality where Dooku could see himself by Palpatine's side without Qui-Gon Jinn joining them. Though Dooku had no intention of ratting out Palpatine either. He feared the Sith Lord. He simply decided to not join him. It was very much a case of Dooku not cheering for Palpatine, just needing the High Council to lose. As long as a collection of elders paid for their hubris, he'd be mostly happy. The Republic needed to go down too, but Palpatine could cover that. Though that again led to another problem for Master Jin. He couldn't just send Jedi Knight Obi-Wan and his friend Satine to Tatooine. Firstly because Padme would need to accompany them, and she was helping Anakin adjust. But secondly because Kenobi immediately signed up for a new Padawan. He was so eager to join Satine as an instructor, and believed he had the necessary skills to do it. Everything really boiled down to Obi-Wan and Satine having done everything together since they were younglings, and he didn't want to feel left behind again. It worked well too, since Padme was 14 and Obi-Wan's new soon-to-be student, Dionys, was 13. Satine was obviously eager to see Obi-Wan become a master. He wanted it throughout their entire lives. It was because they had an instructor when they were younglings that helped Obi-Wan through some of his youthful struggles. When Satine couldn't be there to help, that instructor was. It inspired young Kenobi, though Satine had to acknowledge her own struggles. Things didn't become tense between she and Padme. The two of them were a very tight master and apprentice duo. Winning a duel against the Sith with Master Jin brought them closer together, but it was very easy to see that Padme was developing a strong connection to young Skywalker. Satine, like Obi-Wan, was true to the code, despite bending it thanks to her attachment to Kenobi. It was the irony of the Kryze-Kenobi connection. They were heavily reliant on their attachment to one another to remain happy. Without the other, they were quite miserable. And Satine was worried that her Padawan might develop similar traits. It was the classic Jedi path of do what I say, not what I do. She wasn't going to restrict Padme in any way, shape, or form. Satine wasn't like that, because her master wasn't. But she still became worried. And even though they grew tighter as a duo of master and apprentice, there was one thing that started to develop in their conversations in the months after Naboo. Padme became more politically active than perhaps ever before in her life. Being that Satine descended from a royal lineage and a politically debatable system like Mandalore, galactic politics were always a discussion between these two. But Kryze never forced her opinions on her student. Mandalore's constant state of destruction left her dissatisfied with politics. She allowed Padme to develop her own opinions, and from there, they'd have their own natural debates. However, after the invasion of Naboo, Padawan Amidala started to speak with more vitriol towards the Galactic Senate. Not only did Palpatine use Queen Sabe to ascend to the role of Chancellor, but he completely neglected the court case to see Nute Gunray punished for his crimes. Had Padme been queen during this time, it would have been out of sight and out of mind because of the reconstruction Naboo needed. But Jedi Padawan Amidala, who lived on Coruscant, saw it all. She was a Jedi, and it was very much so her concern because it was right there, just across the city, not the galaxy. She pleaded heavily with Satine that something be done about Nute Gunray. But even though Satine didn't sit far from the political positions of the Council like Jin and Dooku, she knew the truth. Nothing would ever hurt Nute Gunray. He was a wealthy oligarch with a high chance of Republic favoritism because his company sponsored a great many Republic interests inside the Senate. If any given senator chose to stand against him or vote to make the court proceedings go any further, then they'd potentially be blacklisted by the Federation. They not only had a monopoly on trade lanes and commerce, but they held a firm grip over several media outlets. It's why the Sith were so interested in developing a relationship with them. Gunray's court case couldn't just flip a politician's career upside down, it could turn them into a laughingstock, or potential target for assassination. No one wanted to face the Federation, and Satine tried to make that make sense to Padme. But her student had some great points, many of which Satine actually didn't disagree with. It was very similar to Qui-Gon's example from before. The Jedi could try and change it, but their influence was dwindling. They had very little support left in the galaxy. Padme wanted a radical change, but not in the same way that Dooku did. So when she wasn't with her new friend Anakin, training with Satine or debating her master, she started to try and form a connection to Master Yaddle. The High Council Elder had grown tired of the Council's own bureaucracy, especially after Naboo. Seeing how it affected the youngest member of her own lineage worried her more than anything else. The youth of the Order were watching the Jedi stand by while a galactic insurgent walked freely through the courts without any repercussions. As Yaddle saw it, even agreeing with Dooku to a degree, the youth of the Jedi Order were being taught one thing, and the Order was doing the exact opposite. A Jedi must serve peace and justice, but the Council will serve the Chancellor and the Senate's bureaucracy to maintain political favorability. Now isn't that something? While Satine and her student continued to adjust their relationship, Qui-Gon struggled with his own student. Anakin continued to ask about these promises made by Qui-Gon to free Shmi. Between watching after his growingly paranoid master Dooku and taking care of Anakin through his youngling studies, Qui-Gon had lost track of his promise. It'd be unfair to ask Obi-Wan to return to Tatooine with his new student, and everything got stuck in a bind. If it weren't for Padme, Anakin probably would have lost faith in the Jedi Order, because Qui-Gon wasn't keeping up with his promises as he said he would. But it was also quite damning that the 14-year-old Padme Amidala had the best ideas about the Jedi Order, from Anakin's perspective. Qui-Gon even suggested to Dooku that he go to Tatooine and make a difference. It might make him happy, even give him a chance to bond with Obi-Wan. That was really the only case in which Qui-Gon could forgive himself for sending Kenobi to Tatooine, was if he went with an experienced elder like Dooku. Qui-Gon was being a little bit protective, but the threat of the Sith still existed, wherever they might be. Dooku obviously refused this, making himself a hypocrite for hiding on Coruscant while slaves suffered in the Outer Rim. Yet there was one positive with the aging student of Yoda. Dooku was continuing to lay breadcrumbs for Master Yaddle. She was not only an elder on the council, but she had two very politically aware Jedi whispering in her ears, Padme and Satine on one side with Dooku on the other. The only thing is, Dooku knew more than any other Jedi. He knew who the Sith Lord was, and he knew that Sidious was furious. The Sith Lord was developing his own counters across the city, because of Dooku's betrayal. It didn't matter much to Palpatine that a Jedi betrayed him, but it concerned him because Dooku could expose his plan. It did make Sidious a little paranoid, because he had to make sure that his plans didn't fall through. This included hiring personnel security to patrol Kaminoan airspace, to make sure Jedi starships didn't enter. He kept a constant eye on the temple to see if Dooku was doing anything. There were visits to Obadiah to make sure the Pikes didn't give up information on Sifo-Dyas or Silman. And despite all of this, Dooku didn't snitch, which confused the Sith Lord. It truly did. But Palpatine also turned his sights to the most important part of his stint as Chancellor, the betrayal of the Separatist insurgency. Sidious needed a Confederate state to elongate his term as Chancellor. Without it, or a proper leader to lead it, he couldn't do anything. It made his focus on the courts a little hard to manage, because his bills inside the Senate were designed to split the galaxy down the middle. So he couldn't exactly keep Gunray protected at all times. He also couldn't be everywhere all at once, so sometimes protecting Gunray came with executive orders. Masameda certainly wasn't going to set up the Confederacy, he was a Republic loyalist, so Sidious relied on Ameda to do some heavy lifting inside the Senate while he tried to balance everything else. There was no time for a new apprentice or a trusted ally for the future separatist movement. Palpatine had to overextend himself in every direction, which simply translated to doing a lot of minor moves, but none of them were especially effective. There were some successes, obviously, they just never transformed into what he needed them to be. Like, he created loyalty to himself as Sidious from the Techno Union on Skako Minor, but Raxus refused to buckle. it remained a staunch advocate for fixing problems inside the Republic, instead of separating like a more forgotten planet like Umbara with less political sway. The Sith plan was slipping through his fingers, but Sidious would find a way. Even without Plagueis or Maul, he would find a path to true Sith victory. Even towards the end of Palpatine's term, with years passing by since Naboo, Maul didn't speak a word to the Jedi. He remained loyal to his master, simply meditating and waiting to be freed from the prison inside the temple. Dooku remained quiet too, but the one individual that refused to be silenced was 18-year-old Padawan Padme Amidala. She was the anchor of Yaddle's most recent lineage. Not to say that Satine was uninvolved, but her interests were beyond the politics of the Galactic Republic. She had her sights on the Outer Rim, and how to potentially reintegrate outposts into Jedi function again. Millions of people were suffering because the Jedi had to shut down almost all their external outposts. She was also a little distracted. Satine and Obi-Wan, without the guidance of their own respective masters, were free for the first time in their lives. They were themselves the instructors now. They had freedom like they never had before, and while yes, they both took it upon themselves to free Anakin's mother and about 300 other slaves from Tatooine, they were also focused on each other. Their relationship had always been the two of them, and to clarify, this newfound leg of their dynamic did not come at the cost of Padme or Dionys. The Padawans were well taken care of, while their masters were able to remain effective with or without their students nearby. Obi-Wan and Satine really became the mother and father figures of their group. They were the oldest, and having Padme, Dionys, and Anakin around each other built up this complexion of parenthood. Because Qui-Gon and Yaddle were each distracted with their own troubles, the young Jedi were the leaders of this trio of children. Anakin was still Qui-Gon's student, but firstly, Skywalker had only just recently passed his youngling trials, and secondly, Anakin's Grandmaster, Dooku, was a great worry for Master Jin. Initially, it seemed like an age-related mental illness, but as the years went by, it became evident that it was paranoia. Dooku knew more than he could tell anyone, and he stressed about the fall of the Jedi. His views started to shift towards anti-Council rather than anti-Jedi, but it was too late. He wouldn't reveal the clones, he simply could not. He was too afraid. All Dooku really did nowadays was participate in politically charged discussions with Yaddle, Padme, and sometimes Qui-Gon. He never left the temple. The alignment for Satine and Obi-Wan, though, became a problem. They both had been told their entire lives to reject attachment, to avoid it for the betterment of others. And for almost 4 whole years, they had all the freedom they could ever hope for. It translated into pregnancy, and the problems that came with that. Due to the High Council's past problems with Master Eula Braylon, a Jedi Master who had a child and protected him from his problematic behaviors, Satine was rigorously questioned. The Eula case that was just mentioned had a Jedi lie about her attachment to her child. Master Braylon was pretty much excommunicated from the Order, so when Satine had this child of hers, she lied. She had to. Master Kryze became pretty good at lying over the past 4 years because of her relationship with Obi-Wan. It wasn't really even categorized as a relationship in their eyes. They just enjoyed seeing each other a lot, and then an oopsie happened. Satine claimed that she had no attachment to the father, simply citing Ki-Adi-Mundi's multitude of wives as an example. She wasn't procreating for the survival of a planetary species, but as the Jedi Code suggests, it's not illegal for someone to have fun. They're just not permitted to form attachments while having fun. It's slightly frowned upon in the public eye of the Jedi, but thanks to Master Yaddle, it really only stayed within the Council chambers, basically under the radar, aside from Obi-Wan and Padme, who knew about the child. It did cause a small ripple in the relationship between master and apprentice, though. Yet because Satine taught Padme how to be self-sufficient, she wasn't incapable of functioning on her own, especially while Satine was out. She just felt confused. It really was a Jedi family now, with the played roles of mother and father becoming reality. But Obi-Wan and Satine had to genuinely pretend to cut their feelings off for their son. It wasn't easy, and they didn't like it, but they did it well. Qui-Gon had absolutely zero input on the situation. He figured out the truth in like a week, because he fell in love at one point before. His focus was just on training his Padawan at this point, so truthfully, he didn't really care. He trusted Obi-Wan and Satine to be mature enough with their attachment to their son, Corky Kryze, as they called him. It was a strong Mandalorian name, with absolutely no connection back to Obi-Wan's home world of Stujon, which both parties were fine with. On the other side of the master-apprentice relationship was Padme, and all she had done in the previous few years. Her focus on politics was much different than her master's. It should be iterated that because Mandalore never bounced back from its civil war without Satine, which it was still suffering under after 2 decades of constant conflict, Satine didn't really care for super-duper political discussions. She had her opinions, sure, but Mandalore's suffering and constant self-inflicted turmoil never really reached her personally. She cared more about the people in the galaxy rather than governments that constantly neglected, like Mandalore's or the Republic, because people like slaves or outlying Republic systems were suffering. So technically she had her political opinions, they just didn't revolve around the Senate. Padme, though, especially once Anakin became Qui-Gon's official student, hyper-focused on how to fundamentally challenge the Republic as a Jedi. It started with Palpatine. Thanks to Yaddle's guidance over the past 4 years and constant contact with Queen Sabe of the Naboo, who, by the way, extended her stay as queen thanks to an amendment to their planetary constitution, there were actual challenges and challengers presented to Palpatine. Without Dooku aiding him, and absolutely no sign of Maul, Palpatine had no one to build the Confederacy with. He had no problem with uniting the Techno-Union, Commerce Guild, and Trade Federation, but he didn't have the support of the banking clans or Geonosian manufacturers. So he had the blueprints for a military force, just not a separate government to support it. He was stuck in the water, with nowhere to go. His anti-Rim policies, which fit a populist narrative inside the core, wouldn't last long-term without the fear of a confederacy. It was a 2-part plan that wouldn't work without either half. A confederacy or separatist movement did 2 things for Palpatine. It 1, validated his need for anti-Rim policies that disproportionately affected lower-income planets. It 2, also created a decision for other Rim planets. They could either choose to join this separatist movement and risk everything, or they would have the opportunity to actively disfavor themselves policy-wise to remain in good cahoots with the core. But because Dooku was miserably hiding inside the Jedi Temple, there was no official government movement to oppose the Galactic Senate. Palpatine was just nosediving the economy and half the relationships the Republic had with the galaxy into the ground for nothing. As a result, there was natural competition around the galaxy to oppose him inside the Senate. Queen Sabe of the Naboo testified in front of the Senate about the lack of action against Nute Gunray or the promises to protect Republic interests. Padawan Amidala with Master Yaddle called on systems to speak up for themselves and try and create an anti-Palpatine coalition. This was entirely pro-Republic. It was simply anti-Palpatine. He was dividing their galaxy, trying to create tension for his clone war, and because Dooku wasn't there and no one could fill that void, he was left to fight for office and pray that he could win and force a confederacy in his 2nd term. The truth is, he'd have a really good chance at succeeding in his 2nd term, because there were planets considering secession anyways. They just wouldn't do it until a major planet like Raxus did. But Raxus was very pro-Republic, bring the galaxy together under one idea. Master Yaddle, with the weeks counting down until the election, spoke to the High Council with Padawan Amidala by her side. Master Kryze was on a joint mission with Obi-Wan and Dionys in the Coruscant underworld. They were trailing behind Qui-Gon and Anakin. There were rumors at this point about a coming attack on the Jedi Temple, and the nanobots necessary to do the crime were caught by Coruscant police droids. The containers of nanobots were the problem though. No one knew where they went, so the 5 Jedi were spreading out across the underworld to find them. There were also other Jedi participating, but those 5 in particular weren't inside the temple. Yaddle was using this moment, with Padme, to prop her up, and potentially propel her to knighthood. She conceded Amidala's success to Satine's teaching, but Yaddle was quite influential to her grand student. Regardless, Padme spoke first, running through a series of things she noticed while maintaining a steady eye on the Chancellor. She acknowledged how the Council felt and why they did, but something had to be done. The Jedi had to act, or else Gunray would escape the courts scot-free, and the Senate might divide, secession could spiral into rebellion or worse. They were the keepers of peace and justice in the galaxy. They couldn't let this moment pass them up. Master Yaddle followed up with an equally as inspiring speech, with more articulation, but the Council again denied it. They could openly accept the survival of the Sith, and they continued to search for them, wherever they might be. But to believe that the Senate would crumble after 1,000 years of continued, prolonged peace was a hypothetical that not even children would believe. The Jedi in their hubris elected to continue supporting the likes of the Senate, in hopes that their politicians might make the right decision for the galaxy. It was at this, when Yaddle felt her grand student's heart break inside of her chest, that she told the Council that she was stepping down from her position. Everyone could sense the dismay from young Amidala, but they never expected Yaddle to react without hesitation. It was a beat-for-beat moment. After Yoda said his 2 bits about Padme's side and Yaddle's words, Yaddle announced her resignation and promised that they would regret not listening to a future Grandmaster. Yaddle had such a firm belief in her lineage, and no one appreciated it more than Padme in this moment. When they entered the elevator to leave the council chambers, they hugged, and the Jedi Master reassured Padme that everything would be alright, everything would work out for the Jedi, the Republic, and the people of the galaxy. In the days before the election could be held, Palpatine's plans to bomb the temple fell apart. Obi-Wan and Dionys located the nanobot technology that would have been used to bomb the Great Hall of the Jedi Temple. The information they discovered led to a Rodian bounty hunter from the Outer Rim, and another was a changer. Greedo and Zam Wesell were hired by Sidious to carry out this operation. Unfortunately, because the bots were found, the entire plot was uncovered, minus any detail about Sidious. The Jedi had everything except for a reason behind this attack. Neither Zam nor Greedo had any ties to the Jedi. A knight hadn't even interrupted either of their jobs in the past, and there were no records of them getting paid, mostly because the payment would come through once they completed their job. Now they had prison time and no money, and a reason to hate the Jedi. Sidious, though, with the election looking like a landslide against him, with young Senator Bail Organa from Alderaan leading the charge, pushed for the second part of his contingency, an invasion of Coruscant. There hadn't been an attack at the capital since the Old Republic, and from his office he transmitted the brief signal. It came from Mas Amedda's office's control panel, so that Palpatine wouldn't be directly connected, in case anyone was watching or listening, which Palpatine severely doubted anyone was. Palpatine would have used his own communicator, but during election season, the Executive Plaza locked down all handheld communication airwaves to ensure no one rigged an election for victory. So the only way Palpatine could communicate to the Federation was through a control console, and of course he wouldn't use his. Regardless, Yaddle and Padme, who had been watching the Chancellor's offices and tracking their transmissions, caught wave of this and immediately departed for the Executive Plaza. The direction and length of the communication was weird. They were curious enough to begin their investigation though, but by the time they arrived at the Executive Plaza, war had reached Coruscant. Air raid sirens rang throughout the city, an old buzzing noise that hadn't been heard since before the Golden Age. Vulture droids tore through the cityscape, buzzing skyscrapers and firing into pedestrian walkways. People panicked and the Federation dropships descended from orbit. Now, despite the Republic having no real military, capital defense systems were activated. A small, very insignificant fleet with a couple hundred starfighters deployed from the wealthy oligarch moon of Hesperinium. These were stationed there by the Senate to protect those who funded every PAC, super PAC, and money laundering operation inside the Republic. It was a safe way for the Senate to be assured that credits, regardless of Coruscant's fate, would flow to their pockets. From the Jedi Temple, hundreds of starfighters activated and launched into the air in formation behind their best pilots, Masters Windu, Tin, and Plo. Syndralic locked the temple down, and the Temple Guard unit watched the landing procedure for the Federation attack. Yaddle and Padme made it to the executive structure before the attack began, so they rushed along the corridors as Senate commandos readied ramparts throughout the executive building to defend it from the incoming battle droids. Palpatine locked his office down, ensuring that Anaconda Farr and Senator Mothma saw him walking about inside the executive building before the attack. It provided him a good alibi for the transmission, proving that he wasn't communicating anybody, which Palpatine just needed to make sure he was safe from. This attack should, in theory, fling him into emergency powers. If he showed enough stoicism during this attack, the second term would be his, no questions asked. Once the B-1 battle droid horde touched the ground on the surface of Coruscant, they started unloading their blasters into anything. Thousands of droids marched towards the Senate and executive buildings. Police droids, officers, and local militias showed up, and immediately got put down. Everyone who could do something rushed into action to defend the Senate building and the capital city. Though, because the security force with starfighters was engaged in orbit, the only pilots to defend the planet's surface were the Jedi. For 13-year-old Anakin Skywalker, he saw this as his opportunity. Qui-Gon told his apprentice to wait with the other Padawans, while he went to get Sindralik's opinion on the plan. Skywalker, despite obeying pretty much everything his master said, couldn't sit still. He had the opportunity to make a difference again, and he would because he did last time at Naboo. Anakin, while no one was looking, would sneak away and into the hangar bay, where he would take over Yoda's smaller starfighter and launch it into the atmosphere. With Windu leading the charge, the Jedi were able to cut through dozens of Vulture droids at a time, but it didn't change the fact that the Federation fleet, along with their control ship, were protected. These smaller freighters, cruisers, and corvettes from the defense fleet of Hesperidium were maneuverable enough to avoid the heavy turbo cannons of the Lucrehulks, but they were fragile. Any squad of Vulture droids could take out these vessels. Unfortunately for young Skywalker, who remained hopeful to make a difference, he didn't consider that the Federation would update their interior reactor design. No longer could someone run through the hangar bay and detonate a ship. They'd have to actively disable the reactor shields and then destroy it, which, at this point, Anakin didn't have the skill to do and survive. So, he fled from the first hangar bay he entered, and participated in a thrilling dogfight, which he thrived in. At the Executive Plaza, the Jedi engaged the droids in a head-on engagement. Thanks to the police forces and militias providing a small defense line, it gave time for Sindralik to deploy a Jedi fighting force of 1,200 Jedi. 400 of these were temple guards, and the Jedi were able to do it because Captain Mar Tuk, leader of the Federation assault, didn't care about targeting the Jedi Temple, despite orders coming from Sidious to attack it. Captain Mar didn't trust Palpatine, but he was committed to this assault because orders came from the board of directors. Plus, it came with an extremely high payment. He just wouldn't listen to Sidious because he was the fool who damned them at Naboo. Across the Executive Plaza, with Senate commandos and militiamen dying in a pointless battle, the Jedi rose up. Camera droids reported on the attack to the rest of the galaxy, and for the first time in generations, the Jedi could be seen, truly seen in their element by billions. Their lightsabers wove through the air, deflecting blaster bolts, cutting through battle droids, unstoppable in their pursuit of peace and victory. The Republic defense was seemingly outnumbered 10-1, and the Jedi rallied everyone together and gave them hope. It was beautiful. Jedi were across the front lines. Obi-Wan and Satine joined the Temple Guards in the defense. Qui-Gon, who was searching for his apprentice, also lost sight of his master, who decided that this was his one chance to make things right. So even Dooku presented himself with the Jedi Defense Force. Inside the structure, Yaddle and Padme got into the control console for Mas Amedda's office. They tried to figure out who sent the transmission. Then, Padawan Amidala got an idea. Security footage should be still available, especially if the firewall around deleting documents was still up. Yaddle didn't really know what Padme meant, but basically, if the Executive Plaza came under attack, there were protocols in place inside the system designed to activate to make sure all footage could be accounted for and reviewed by the Senate. Now, of course, Palpatine knew this, but he didn't cut the cameras. He never anticipated anyone to catch on firstly, and instead, his plan was to delete everything after the fact, to make sure, he survived, because he rightly assumed that the people and the Senate would be more concerned with the battle itself rather than the why of the battle. The why always comes later. Yaddle continued to siphon through documents of data until her grad student returned with the damning information, the truth behind the attack. Padme's blood boiled at the sight. All of her suspicions had been proven right to a degree, that Palpatine was working against Republic interests. Her saber ignited and she demanded that Palpatine die right here and now. Yaddle, seeing the tension as explosions detonated outside the window, told her grand student to lower her saber. She should think about this. How might the Jedi look if she murdered the Chancellor? They would look as if they framed everything on Palpatine and failed fantastically. But if they captured Palpatine, promising to get him away from the action to protect him, then they could reasonably prove to the Republic the evidence they had. Death would only make the Chancellor a martyr. Padme understood and listened, deigniting the weapon. In space, the fighter fight was getting worse. Mar Tuk, knowing that the Republic Defense Force was crumbling, started to move the flagship out of formation. The age-old kid in Nemodian didn't fear this assault. He knew they had the Jedi by the throat. Nothing would stop the inevitable surrender of the capital. They could build a separatist movement off of this alone. But young Skywalker had a different idea. He noticed something different in the ship he entered. The external shield generators might be on the other side of the reactor. Say, if he entered the right wing hangar bay, rather than the left one, he could destroy the ship from the inside out. Windu didn't even know that Anakin was doing this, so Skywalker, without anyone watching, slipped through the bay doors of Mar Tuk's flagship. The captain noticed the Jedi invader and shut the doors behind him. Skywalker, of course, did not notice. When he rolled around the hangar, he saw the panel that held the shield generator power bank. It was all connected to the external generator, which covered the ship with a protective shield. Without hesitating, he fired his missiles into the generator, and watched a string of explosions rise through the hangar and out of the vessel. He turned back and started pushing towards the edge of the ship. Mar Tuk from the command center watched the shields of the Lucrehulk drop around him, and demanded that the flagship return to formation immediately. He wanted every single droid inside the capital ship to destroy the Jedi fighter that remained inside the hangar. Outside though, the Jedi noticed the dropping shields and started hitting power cells, sending explosions into space and deep into the corridors of the ship. Anakin, as he got to the exit of the hangar bay, realized he had nowhere to go. The doors were closed on him, and panic set in. He hovered about and looked for a target to destroy, when battle droids unloaded their blasters on his fighter. He activated full power to the shields as he maneuvered out of the way, and tried to contact someone, but nothing got out. Panic got worse as he tried to meditate to try and find his resolution. Qui-Gon's words rang out through his head, "Don't think, feel." He pulled the throttle from side to side, as just beyond the thick hull, Master Windu, flanked by Plo Koon and Saesee Tiin, made their run against the control center. They fired their blasters and lined up the last of their torpedoes. Vulture droids pulled into the way, trying to cut them out of the sky. The Jedi were elusive though, as they weaved around shots and continued to focus on their shot. 12 different torpedoes launched from their holders and glided directly towards Mar Tuk. He yelled from his command chair, demanding that point defense systems lock onto the target, but it didn't work, as each rocket exploded into the command bay of the vessel, sending out a rippling explosion to the central ball of the ship. On the surface, every single battle droid deactivated. They dropped to the ground dysfunctional. There was one critical change at Naboo that made all of this possible at all. The Federation never lost the Battle of Naboo because the main control ship was destroyed. They lost because Nute Gunray ordered the flagship to stand down. So they may have come to Coruscant with a larger fleet, an even larger ground force this time too. But all the droids were still connected to one central console, the one under Mar Tuk's command. The captain that single-handedly won the battle and then immediately lost it in his arrogance. The Jedi and militia on the surface celebrated as a starship carrying Yaddle, Padme, and Palpatine landed at the temple. Syndralic, Opa Rancisis, and Grandmaster Yoda were ready. Sidious could do nothing. He never thought the Jedi, let alone a child, would have caught on to his plans. And for Anakin Skywalker, he could feel the explosions detonating around him. The droids ceased their firing. They were all dead on the ground. A blazing fire rolled around the edges of the hangar bay. Skywalker looked back. 13 years of life flashing before his eyes as the bright, beautiful flames started to edge closer by every passing millisecond. When that same fire exploded in front of him, he thought it was the end. He could see his life coming to a close, when a familiar voice cut through, telling him it was time to come home. Anakin's smile widened, and he flipped all power to the engines. He throttled forward after Qui-Gon Jinn, with the fire and destruction of the local Hulk trailing him. He blasted out of the hole created by Qui-Gon, Depa, and Ayla. They all accompanied Master Jinn, who suspected that Anakin was of course in danger. Skywalker cheered on the way out and down to the surface, where from the balconies of every high-rise, thousands, no, millions of people cheered the Jedi on. In space, the Federation fleet turned heel, retreating from the battle after watching yet another invasion turn upside down. Without a functional droid army, there was no point in continuing. Skywalker waved from his cockpit as he passed by people of all ages. He felt like a hero. He and the Jedi were heroes. In the Executive Plaza, Obi-Wan and Satine hugged each other as tightly as they could, while Dooku, just beyond them, smiled for the first time in 4 years. Inside the Jedi Temple, Yaddle commended her grand student for the remarkable work she had done in uncovering this dastardly plot. Yoda and the other present counselors would handle Sidious from here on out. He was no longer a problem for the now 18-year-old Jedi Knight. Of course, Padme's knighting ceremony would come later. The shock of being attacked at the Capitol changed the perspective of many senators. They now wondered if throwing their souls away for a shiny credit was really worth the security cost of keeping the Federation so close to galactic power. Many decided that they had been foolish for allowing it to get this far. The Jedi felt even worse. They allowed a Sith to enter the center of the government and nearly destroy the Republic. For having found this critical flaw, Padme was given the honorary rank of Master, but she denied it, favoring an honest and modest approach to becoming a Master. She wanted to teach before officially earning the title, something the Council respected even more. Padme's frustrations with them were validated, and as a result, the Council created an oversight committee of double their members, 26 Jedi, to make sure the Council was operating effectively. The Oversight Committee would view every document, session, and decision made by the Council to ensure they didn't allow hubris to direct their choices. They nearly failed once and horrifically failed, and they would not be allowed to do it a second time. Padme would accept a position in this committee, as would Yaddle, Dooku, and Qui-Gon. While the two Sith would be dealt with honorably, the Jedi became overly aware that they needed to keep a closer eye on the galaxy. Part of this came with the Sith and the other with the Federation attack that they didn't anticipate. But thanks to a revitalized perception of the Jedi in the public eye, the Senate awarded them a much larger budget to work with. Everyone in the galaxy saw an order berated for their minor mistakes and always thrown to the dogs, stand up for all of them in their darkest hour. The Jedi didn't fret or fear the battle. They lost a great many warriors in defense of the Republic, and they did it without even thinking about it. They brought Palpatine to justice for everyone to see. They were the true heroes, and it was time that the Republic treated them as such. The imagery for the Jedi returned. They were Jedi Knights, truth seekers, and keepers of peace and justice in the galaxy. They were no longer the punching bag of the Senate. Hand in hand with Padme's wants, Satine's would be fulfilled too. Thanks to the expanded budget, Jedi outposts across the rims would return to function, with a dozen more in construction for future use. In fear of the Federation and in total reaction to their second invasion in 4 years, a galactic military would be created, and a short-term conflict would be waged with the Federation. Planets that once considered separation or secession remained with the Republic and became more loyal to the system, as the major conglomerates received a handful of checks and balances to ensure they never got out of control again. It started with their complete and total removal from the Senate. With the Jedi returning to the rims to spread peace, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon could continue to effectively train their own students in Dionys and Anakin in the Jedi path. Padme herself would begin training Cal Kestis very soon, the next addition to their remarkable lineage. Satine would continue to pride her apprentice, and as her and Obi-Wan's son grew up, she grew closer to her own lineage. Satine undervalued their connection as she chased freedom with Obi-Wan. Once they experienced it, they were ready to be more mature Jedi. Corky would have the chance to be trained by both his parents, at one point or another in his life. But Corky's upbringing and career as a Jedi would be very successful, without turmoil, without drama, and without any problems. Dooku would confess his truth to the High Council, and once they arrived at Kamino, the security patrols had left. Sidious was no longer paying them, and they stopped doing a payless job. It led to another very unorthodox investigation, with Dooku providing every detail he had about the last of the Sith. But it also meant that for Dooku, he'd be more present in his lineage's life. He'd form an actual connection to Obi-Wan, Dionys, Corky, and of course Anakin too. It was nice to embrace the Jedi path, especially after 4 long years of constant depressive episodes while he hid away from Sidious. Lineage became a huge focus for both the Yaddle line and the Dooku line. The age groups overlapped, and while Padme and Anakin never fancied each other romantically, because they grew up together after meeting later, they filled a very similar role as to what Obi-Wan and Satine once did. But this time it'd be with Cal and Ahsoka, their own apprentices. Dionys, the impatient apprentice of Obi-Wan, eventually found his calling as a Jedi Temple guard, and an archivist after that. But all of that was possible because the Sith had been destroyed, balance restored to not just the Force but the Senate, and if it weren't for the Yaddle lineage and their pursuit of true justice, then the slaves of the Outer Rim wouldn't have been freed. In the future, as Master Amidala joined the ranks of the High Council, and even became the Grand Master Yaddle knew she could be, that's what she looked back on. How Padme, her closest friends, her master, her Grand Master Yaddle, defeated the Sith, saved the Republic from caving in on itself, stopped a galactic-scale war, and even freed the galaxy from the shackles of the syndicates. And that, my friends, is a story and a half. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this. So, already back with a movie-length story for you guys. Pretty excited about this. Not that movie-length long, but it's pretty long. I'm actually really excited about this one. You guys seem to really like the path with the Satine and Padme one, with Satine and Padme with the Sith, and this one is very much so a direct contrast. I kind of wanted to flip the, flip it around a little bit. I wanted to start the story with battle and then kind of build up the characters as the story went on, and it was a little challenging to do. It's not something I've really ever done before. It's not something I really do a lot, and it's definitely challenging. It's a lot of fun, personally for me, just to kind of experiment with the style, so I hope you guys enjoyed the style compared to how I usually kind of frame the stories. But with this one specifically, I wanted to build Padme and Satine up throughout the video and make their actions almost coincide with how you kind of introduce them as characters after their first duel. It's like how Satine and Obi-Wan are actively more like Padme and Anakin, because they've always had this fling for each other, but they've both been restricted from it. It's kind of like the, if you went to like a Catholic school or something, it's kind of like that. It's like, once you get a little taste of freedom, you want all of it. And then it's like constantly chasing that until eventually you kind of wear out of it. And that's what their story is. Their story is they like constantly wanted this freedom, and then when they both became masters, they're like, holy crap, let's do everything. Then that, little accident happens, I guess. You know how that goes, I suppose. But with Padme, I wanted to have like almost the inverse. I think the Sith story was more of a Satine story, and I wanted this story to be more of a Padme story. Padme very much so is the anchor of the story. She is the reason everything kind of works out, and it feels fitting for her. I feel like a lot of her character, just like who she's set up to be, is kind of like not present all the time in the prequels, even in the Clone Wars, and so it felt like kind of nice to kind of put her into what her character's designed to be, from my point of view, is that like she's seeing everything Palpatine's doing, and she's not giving him the benefit of the doubt. Like, yeah, sure, he quote-unquote saved their planet, but did he really? He didn't really do anything. He just became Chancellor and was like, oh, we gotta do bureaucracy, and she did it herself. She and like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in canon did it themselves. And because she's not on Naboo, constantly trying to rebuild her planet, she's seeing it in person. And I felt it'd be nice for Yaddle, Satine, and Padme to be that lineage, like a straight line there. I also wanted to differentiate with Dooku. I wanted Dooku to kind of become like totally afraid, so that it leaves way for a completely different universe here, where I'm able to build this battle with the Federation and the whole sequence before the second term election. Whereas instead of just ending it early, it was kind of nice building it for that. It's a little bit kind of like an excuse to kind of put Dooku out of the story, but he's just kind of sitting there. He's just sitting there afraid, and then he becomes like depressed because he realizes what he almost did, what he started, and then can't bring himself to stop from continuing. And it's kind of that, like, it kind of relates to the hypocrisy that he has. He's like, oh, I'm gonna help Palpatine build an empire that's so much better than the Republic, and then he just creates Republic 2. Like, the Confederacy is just the Republic 2. And it's kind of like relatable to that hypocrisy, and that's kind of what I was trying to go there for, is like, he's kind of a hypocrite, and he gets called out for being a hypocrite in this. As for the ending, I kind of wanted this cool big battle thing, and I kind of wanted to use that, like, kind of foreshadowed plot with Gunray actively surrendering at Naboo to kind of lead to the destruction of the fleet in the end. And I had that little tense moment with Anakin where he thinks he's gonna hero it, and he doesn't. He like almost gets killed. But it's also this really cool way for him to be very much so a part of the destruction of the Federation fleet, but also for the other Jedi present in the battle to do so as well. So I hope you all enjoyed. This is like kind of a nice, really big mix of the spiritual, the romantic, the political, and then the battle aspect. It's really nice combination of it all. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. I love you all. Spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.